Hey, greetings there, everybody. GleeCon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last episode, we read some material from Sylvanas, which is probably shortly after the end of Warcraft 3. Um, but the storyline could weave because some of the interlude that we read was far after it. It was closer to the beginning of Wrath of the Lich King, uh, the expansion for World of Warcraft. Um, but either way, it's dealing with the rise of the Forsaken Empire, and specifically how they start plotting a disease that would hurt undead or scourge, but really undead and living alike, and Sylvanas beginning to try to find Nathanos. So stay a while and listen as we probably continue both of those two things in chapter 16 of the novel Sylvanas. Some of those who had groomed and stabled animals in life had begun training the large bats in the area to obey them. As Sylvanas mounted its back, the beast chittered and flapped energetically, the beat of his membranous wings reminding her of those of a dragon hawk. She stopped her thoughts from wandering too far down that path. There were only painful memories at the end of it, so she's getting a flight path and flight masters. She, Anya, and Clea traveled through the Undercity sewers until they emerged into the dim light of Tirisfal, heading west toward the Plague Lands. While a constant pall hung over the land now inhabited largely by the undead, at least there were still some green things. The ground that gradually appeared below them was desiccated and dead, the grass and trees, and most of the beasts victims of the blight. Those who survived had been changed, plague bats, and dog-like creatures moved about below her, but no sign of anything that had once been human. A memory flickered, determined to be recalled despite Sylvanas' desire to forget it, of Nathanos on a dragon hawk, with she behind him. They had been investigating the deaths of Larissa and Virath Windrunner, and Nathanos thought perhaps more evidence could be found deeper into the East Weald, as it was called. The place had been verdant at the time, homey, pleasant, fields of green and gold spread out in neat little squares, some hosting small white dots of woolly white sheep. All this was gone. Arthas's reach was so very long. Sylvanas wondered if she would even recognize her champion. But no, Clea had known him. Certainly his lady would. And there it was. Once the Maris Stead's isolation had been a welcome one. It had been peaceful and green, its wide fields stretching out and surrounding the house. They could meet here, she and Nathanos, without worrying about the rumors and the whispers. His younger cousin, what was his name? Stefan? That was it. Had lived here for a while, but only once had intruded upon her time with Nathanos. Bright-eyed, lively little Stefan, who bubbled over with enthusiasm and talked about becoming a paladin. Had Stefan survived, achieved his dream, become Scourge? It did not matter. The only thing Sylvanas cared about was Nathanos. She and the two rangers landed a slight distance away and approached. The once cozy farmhouse had fared as poorly as the surrounding area. Dark, damaged, seemingly abandoned, with no evidence of habitation of any sort. Senses alert, they walked inside. All the furniture was gone, and the windows were broken or boarded up. Her boots left tracks in thick dust. If Nathanos was in the area, he had not come home in some time, if at all. Clea, Sylvanas said, are you certain it was? She heard the scraping of claws on the floorboards, a deep growl, and turned just in time to see a giant hound launch itself at her, toxic slaver dripping from its jaws. Sylvanas dodged, deflecting the attack with her bow. The hound landed awkwardly and clambered to its feet, slightly dazed and shaking its head. It was too close for her to shoot it, so she simply seized an arrow and shoved it forward into the beast's throat, instantly silencing a growl. Anya and Clea too were being attacked, easily dispatching the plague hounds. But more were coming, baying in a strange, echoing tone, and Sylvanas was annoyed and impatient and took the fight to them. It was over in a few moments, and the three retrieved their arrows from the still twitching corpses. To answer your question, my lady, Leah said, yes, I am certain it was Nathanos. Then let us be about finding him, and Sylvanas cautioned them, I will not easily forgive if you select the wrong arrows. A quick glance at the former farmlands that spread out below their eyes revealed pockets of scourge, lurching and stumbling to no real purpose. From here it would be impossible even for her to distinguish a face, especially a rotted one. So we take them one by one, Sylvanas thought. Killing scourge is never a wasted act. Sylvanas pointed to a cluster of the things, and they descended. As they approached in utter silence, they drew no notice from the once human creatures. Nathanos was not among them. She shook her head, and her rangers nodded, knocking their bows and firing. Sylvanas tasted doubt as group after group revealed themselves to be nothing but shambling undead. Now, she told herself, I will find him, no matter how long it takes. She had lost count of the number the three of them had killed when a woman's screams of anguish and terror caught her attention. One of the scourge was making a kill, and in short order the screaming ceased and the scourge began to feast on the warm flesh. After but a moment, though, he, rose and stood still as stone, offering Sylvanas a clear view of his face. Nathanos. It was far, far worse than she had feared. It was no surprise Clea had thought him irretrievably lost. For the briefest of moments, Sylvanas wondered if she should let him go. Perhaps the hand that had touched him with love and life should be the hand that dealt him the mercy of death. But no, she needed him. He was her champion, and she his lady. What with the Horde, Arthas Menethil, and the Lich King, everything Sylvanas had cared for that had held meaning had been ripped from her. She would not add Nathanos to that list. I will bring you back. Stealthily, she, Clea, and Anya moved forward as the murdered woman rose a scourge and looked at Nathanos. Sylvanas seized this moment of distraction. She brought her fist down, and the other two fired until the newly made scourge dropped, her unlife having lasted mere seconds. Nathanos, hunched, bloody, his never handsome face a hideous wreckage, whirled toward them and started to charge. Aim for the legs, Sylvanas shouted. Nathanos went down, a barrage of arrows slamming into his thighs and shins. Arrows that ended in small metal orbs made specifically for this task. It would keep him from attacking, but would not harm him. Nathanos! Sylvanas screamed his name, infusing it with all the dark banshee power that had slain so many at Silvermoon. The young, the kind, the artists. She could hear that power reverberating in the very air. He lay still. Hope rose in her. Could it be this easy? And then he struggled again to rise, growling in frustration. Again, Sylvanas shouted his name. Remember yourself. Remember me. A third time she called to him, letting her pain bleed into the echoing tones until her voice sounded as broken as he. She pulled off her hood. Perhaps if he could see her. Yellow flickered in his eyes. He made an awful guttural sound, but then something seemed to click into place, and he found a way to speak. Sylvanas. Their eyes met, and he lowered them and put an arm up to hide his face as if he did not want her to look at him. There came a soft, low moan that should have broken her heart, but only infuriated Sylvanas more. Oh, butcher, you will pay dearly, and I will not be quick. Later, Sylvanas would find she could not remember what else was said, but she cut through his shame, reminded him of who he had been and still could be. Not even death could stop them. Finally, he rose and made his way to her. I am yours, dark lady, for all my days. But as they walked toward where their mounts awaited them, Nathanos froze. He growled, not the feral, mindless sound of the scourge, but a growl of annoyance. He looked about, seeming to not know who he was, even though his farmstead was but a few yards away. Anya and Clea exchanged glances. Return, Sylvanas told them. I will follow. Go. She had hoped for a searingly painful but quick solution, that once Nathanos understood he had survived No, that was no longer the correct word. Endured. He would be ready to accompany her triumphant return to her people. But he was not. Sylvanas steeled herself. He had returned to her before. She would bring him back again. In a way, what Arthas had done to Nathanos was more damaging to Sylvanas than all the torture the Death Knight had put her through. She was strong. She had fought, clawed, willed her way to a knowledge of self that eluded so many thousands of others. Sylvanas knew that she would always have found a way back to herself, by herself. But in life, her strength had at times been supported by strength other than her own, though those who knew Nathanos would never have suspected the man could be kind in any way. And now Arthas had cut that support out from beneath her. But Nathanos had been there for her in her moments of darkest despair, so Sylvanas determined she would be there for him. Time passed. Fragments of time returned in his choices of words, the tone of voice, then like a tide receding memory would leave him. She walked him through everything they had done together, everything they had been to each other. Periods of clarity began to last longer. While that was an encouraging sign, her furious frustration was also greater, as was the strange hollowness inside she no longer understood how to manage. It's like undead 51st dates. One day, the 3rd or 13th or 30th, they were talking of shooting, of hunting, of arrows in flight, and his glowing gaze went to her bow. "Do you want this?" Sylvanas asked. Nathanos nodded. She took his left hand and folded it around the grip. Bones poked through the leather of his tattered gloves, and Sylvanas watched as his fingers first did nothing, then slowly closed. He got to his feet, hunched and unsteady, and lifted the bow into the proper position. His right hand came up to touch the string, rolling it between his fingers, then drawing it back, anchoring at what remained of his jaw. He did not release it, but eased it back, then turned to her and held out his hand. She gave him the quiver, which he slipped over his hunched back. Nathanos was clumsy yet with his bony fingers, but he knocked the arrow correctly. He glanced over at her, his eyes glowing yellow, but seeing her. Sylvanas steeled herself with a madness that was surely hard on the heels of her most successful attempt yet. Then he turned his head, aimed at the side of his old house, and let fly. The arrow thunked into the old wood. A sense of triumph filled her as she watched him shoot. The first few arrows were haphazard, but his aim grew truer with each one released from the bow. Finally, he grouped all of them together so closely one could barely insert a finger between them. He slowly lowered the bow, then looked at her for a long moment. His eyes flickered. "Is that the best you can do?" she asked, keeping her voice light even as she dared to hope that this time he would stay with her. "Only a select few see me at my very best," he said. How odd that with so many memories gone, this one remained. It was an unexpected gift, and Sylvanas would take it. Nathanos remembered nothing about what that had happened, only that there had been shambling corpses attacking him until he had emptied his quiver and they had fallen upon him. "Those creatures were the scourge," Sylvanas said, "and for a time you were, too, but no longer." "Only because of you," he said quietly. "Scourge. Yes, I remember. We were told about them. It seemed unbelievable, but you and I, we are strong of will. Our minds are our own. We are the Forsaken. Did it take you long to bring me back?" Sylvanas thought of the endless times he had seemed to rally only to fall back into the pit of oblivion. How she had argued with herself, almost left, almost to return and continue to try, though only to return. "No," she said, the lie coming easily, and smiled. "It did not. You are my champion, after all." "I would hate to think I failed you," he said, sounding relieved. "Nathanos, tell me what you remember of us," she said, and he did. They sorted through the pieces of themselves that were left after Arthas. Nathanos recalled how fierce and passionate and occasionally stormy their relationship had been. Sylvanas told him he was rough with everyone else but gentle with her. They talked of climbing Sungray's Peak and Sylvanas' opinions on beauty. "Well," Nathanos said dryly, As I am uglier than ever, imagine I appeal to you even more. It was sarcasm at which he excelled, and Sylvanas was glad to see he had recovered it. But then Nathanos' hand went to his chin, and he fell silent. That moment atop Sungraze was only a memory now, and it could never be recreated. For a moment the loss was more than Sylvanas could bear. She could remember love for Nathanos, but could not feel it. She remembered joy, but could not experience it. Then sudden anger and resolve chased away the melancholy. "You are still my champion," Sylvanas said intensely. "You are strong, stronger than ever, maybe even more so. I will not let our state dictate who we are. We will be what we once were to each other. I will make it happen." "If anyone can," said Nathanos, "it is you, my lady." She had done what she had set out to do. She had recovered Nathanos, and her champion now stood at her side. All things felt possible. Arthas and his minions did not stand a chance. Okay. So again, this is something I don't know that at any point it's ever going to be really addressed, but yeah, probably happens after Warcraft 3, based on the last chapter, and before World of Warcraft, because I'm pretty sure she has Nathanos as her champion already by the time you meet her in the Undercity. Okay. Now, I don't know, I may be kind of gross, but I just can't stop thinking of just how gross any sort of romance would be between these two corpses. On that note, we got this episode in the pipe, 5x5. Look forward to seeing you all next time. Thank you so much. See ya. The next episode of Lore of Warcraft.